Hey everybody, Jeff here. So, yes, let's do another contest entry for, let's start this week off with another contest entry. So far, the first one this week, but there are a couple I'm going to catch up on, so let's jump onto this one. This one is for JT's Record Room. He's pushing to 400 subscriptions. Check him out, link will be below. And so he's having a quick contest, and it's pretty easy. Basically, he wants to see 5 of your favorite records. Now, he did make the comment, he said it could be new, but he did make the initial comment. He said it'd be great, you know, if they were like records that you've loved since you were a kid. And so really, I thought, well, let me go to that. Let's go back and dig into the Wayback Machine of our brain and think back to early days of musical life. Now, I will say, and I've said it before in all the videos before I discovered rock and roll at the age of like 11, I was mainly listening to, you know, the disco stuff of the era. Grease, the Grease soundtrack. I don't have that, or I'd show that because I still love it, but I don't. I have this, you know, the movie, and I don't want to pull out CDs. I'm sticking with vinyl. So that would have been one. I was thinking of Saturday Night Fever because I did love that soundtrack, but honestly, and I have that on vinyl. But honestly, I liked a handful of songs from that, so it's not like I can say I love this album to death. There were a handful of songs in there that really stuck out to me as a kid, because mostly as a kid I bought 45s. So I was trying to go a little, you know, a little more. Let's start when we first, you know, got into rock, because we have some of that on vinyl. So, and I've shown this 100 times, and I've said it 100 times before. This was the very first rock album I bought. My brother and him, we went down, and I had learned about Kiss, and I went out, and this was the first album I bought. It was fairly new at the time. At the same time I bought this, or shortly thereafter, Alive 2 came out, because I did remember seeing that. I still have vivid memories of seeing that on the giant displays in the stores, usually Montgomery Ward's. So it would have been around that same time, so I probably picked this up a little later in the year when it came out. But anyway, so yes, this was my first endeavor into a rock and roll. Probably the second major rock band I discovered was Van Halen. I'm going with the Fair Warning album because still this is one of my go-to albums. This, to me, I love all the early stuff. And when you're talking the, you know, David Lee Roth era, this album, I saw this concert. This album for me is like in that time frame where I really have a lot of memories of really loving them. And so this album to me is very nostalgic and still one of my favorites. Obviously you can't say anything bad about the first album. The first album is classic start to finish. Second album, at the days when it came out, it was kind of quirky to me and I didn't like it. Now I absolutely love it. It's just another masterpiece. When you get into this era, this is just, you know, this is where we started getting the hit. This Is Love, and we started seeing the MTV era. This is when we started hearing more about them, and just they were really getting popular and flashy in all the magazine covers and all that. So this was really the big heyday. Women and Children First, another one of my favorites, and that photo from that album was very iconic. It seemed like it was everywhere. But for some, you know, for me, this album is really just a pivotal one that is really ranks up high on me. So I went with this, even though I probably discovered them a little bit earlier than that. Then I was thinking, you know, of other bands that I found in the early 80s that would have been shortly after the Van Halen. Of course, by then you're getting into all of the bands that look and sound like that from the LA scene or from wherever, and who's got the spandex or the bandanas, the torn jeans, the flashy clothing. So there's a bunch of them. But then you got some odds and ends that you discover through MTV in the early 80s that you end up liking or loving that are a little bit out of that norm. And of course, I've always shown and talked about Adam and the Ants. This is probably still, you know, the first and second album, this being in the second, would have been still 2 of my all-time favorites. I love them all, but first and second. So I wanted to show this. Anyway, so we're going to go with that because that is something from my early childhood days, early teen years. Another band around the same time would have been Queensryche. First album still absolutely just high water mark to me. They've changed sounds from album to album. I love all their stuff. Not equally, but I love pretty much everything that bears the Queensryche name to some degree. But this to me is still where it began. It was just groundbreaking at the time. It blew our mind. So it is very much one of my favorites. And then some of the other, when I did start branching off more into hard rock realm, and again, my friend had actually turned me onto this. He was getting a lot of stuff. Somehow he was getting into bands from overseas, and he was into some of the classic bands that up to that point I didn't know anything about, didn't care much about, since then have fallen in love with. But one of them would have been a post-UFO album by Michael Schenker. Now, Michael Schenker Group, MSG, this album originally, this is the updated cover, but it's got the logo MSG in red with the guitar and stuff, and that's the iconic image to me. This is the second Michael Schenker solo album. I discovered this way before the first. Both of them are must-haves if you're into this, but this album to me from start to finish is just an absolute favorite. If I'm going to go back and reach for a Michael Schenker album, I'm probably going to reach for this. It's going to be either this, the first album, or maybe the third album. The early Gary Barden years are great. I love I showed recently where I got the newer albums. Obviously, he's still putting out superb music. I love everything he's done, everything he's been involved in for the most part, but it goes back to here. This is where I discovered him, and this is the album that stands out as still absolutely one of my top-notch favorites. Now, then he wants to see 3 movie directors, movies, preferably with good soundtracks. Now, I don't have favorite directors. I mean, I don't really, I judge movies mainly more by actors than by directors. I don't really necessarily care who directs it. I'm not big into directors. I mean, obviously there are some that have done a lot of work, but I had to look up some of these just to say, oh, I didn't realize he did that movie too. So I'm not really that much into it. So I'm hoping that I'm not misspeaking or making a fool of myself doing this. But I'm going to show 3 of my favorite movies, and they do have great soundtracks. I kind of leaned heavily more towards the soundtrack aspect. But then when I looked up some of the other movies they have done or had directed, I'm like, oh, I didn't realize he had done that. So, but again, I don't watch movies based on that. I don't know the nitty gritty about that. But I'm going to go with an absolute classic. This is Spinal Tap. Now this I believe, Rob Reiner is the one who directed this, and I believe, according to what I found online, I think this was like the first movie he directed. Now he was best known, and I knew him as, he was Meathead on All in the Family. So we saw him in the 70s, and I'm not sure when the show ended, but I know in the 70s we saw that show and he was on there. Then in here, this is like 84, he directed this, and according to the list of stuff, this looked like the first one he did. But I also didn't realize he went on to do Sure Thing. That's another great classic from the 80s. Stand By Me, another one that launched a lot of young stars that are still doing great stuff today. Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, A Few Good Men, You Can't Handle the Truth. Anyway, he's done a lot of great movies, and there's so many more you could list, but those are some of the great. And of course, this is a great absolute soundtrack. I don't have on vinyl because it's very expensive, and I have yet to find a copy for a decent price. But yes, Spinal Tap, I'm a big, huge fan. I've got so much stuff by them, videos and stuff. It's just, some amazing stuff. Now, the next one, I love the movie and all the music involved in it, but we got Almost Famous. This is a Cameron Crowe movie. Now, he also did Vanilla Sky and Jerry Maguire, starring Tom Cruise. He wrote the story for Fast Times at Ridgemont High, an absolute classic from the other day. Say Anything, there's just a lot of movies that he's done. Now this particular, I should look up and see if there's an actual vinyl soundtrack, but it's based upon the fictitious band Stillwater, and this is actually a CD that came with it. This is the deluxe edition. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 songs. Now, basically, Stillwater, while it is a fictitious band with, Jason Lee and Billy Craddock and all these guys in it, who do an excellent job making this band look like a band on the road. It's just an absolute pleasure to watch. I love this. If you're into music, this is just great. It's about, you've got the people who follow the bands on the road, the groupies, about a kid trying to write a review, but then you got the band. Anyway, the music on this is made up, I believe it's by the Hart sister, people, the Wilson sisters from Hart. You got, I want to say Peter Frampton was involved in here. It's got some classic people who pulled together to record this. Great stuff. I kind of wonder if there is I should look it up and see if there's a vinyl release. I just love this movie. Love this movie. But anyway, lots of great stuff. Again, Cameron Crowe has done quite a few movies. And then I'm going digging way back. This is actually one of the first music-related movies I ever saw as a kid. This would have been pre-Kiss. This would have been in the Grease days when I was seeing movies. This would have been when I was 8, 9 years old. I should not have been going to see this movie. It scared me to a degree at the end, but I saw it in the theater at least 6 times. And as a kid of 8 or 9 years old, That's a lot of times to see a movie. I mean, this is pre-Star Wars too. I saw Star Wars at least a dozen times. And Star Wars would have been 3 years later, so I'd have been 11 or so by then. But at 8 years old or 9 years old, this was playing in the cheap theater in town, the one that's like the little village movie, and you go there and you pay a dollar or two on Tuesday nights or whatever it was back in the 70s. One of the early Brian De Palma films, Phantom of the Paradise. Just absolutely fell in love with this movie as a kid. I love the music. It is a musical. Lots of changes of musical styles in here, and it is of course such a favorite movie that of course I do, thanks to Beth. VCLT'd me a copy of the soundtrack a couple years ago. Absolutely one of my favorites. I have it on CD. Absolutely just one of my favorite soundtracks, musical wise. And that is, like I said, Brian De Palma, everybody knows him. He went on to do a lot of movies which are nothing like this at all. Carrie, Scarface, Carlito's Way, The Untouchables, lots of gangster films. He did the first Mission Impossible with Tom Cruise. The list goes on. So many movies with Pacino and people like that. Just Mission to Mars. Just his list of amazing accomplishments go on. But this is the early days, 1974. Just an amazing, quirky, based on Phantom of the Opera, sort of, kind of, man with the mask singing, terrorizing the opera. It's just, I don't know. I get goosebumps when I listen to this because the albums, the music, are just so much a part of me from the time when I was 8. Anyway, I'm going to stop rambling on because that's crazy. But that's it. I hope that it counts. 3 movies, 5 records. Like he said, tomorrow 5 records could change. But those, I tried to dig back to ones that were just ingrained in my mind from when I was a child. And those child to teenage years. That's when I really got into music. So that's all. JT's Record Room. Check it out, link below. Thanks for watching. Rock on and rock hard.